Royalty, royalty, power to the chosen people.
Shalom, shalom, and today we'll be on lesson 3 of Beginner's Biblical Hebrew. So today we're going to start picking up the pace a little bit. So at first we're moving kind of slow, getting you familiar with just hearing these words and these letters and visualizing them. So you've been over your charts, you've been writing. So by now we should be able to pick up the pace and kind of get into the meat of what we want to be dealing with throughout these lessons. So a person can get weary learning anything, whether it be biblical Hebrew or how to write in a different language or read in a different language or picking up an instrument like a guitar or a piano. And so what happens is when a person wants to learn something new, they already want to be at a particular place. And so part of the frustration is I should have been further than this, or had I been doing this 10 years ago, I would have been here. So I understand that frustration from a broad range of trying to pick up different languages and trying to play different instruments and even trying to learn, certain mathematical things throughout school. So I know how that feels. So what I want to do is first encourage you. What you have done thus far is more than anybody who hasn't done anything. So you should give yourself a pat on the back. The second thing is you have to persevere past the learning curve. With everything, there's a learning curve. For me, when I first picked up the Hebrew alphabet, I was just completely floored. I didn't know these things. I didn't know how to pronounce anything. It was just terrible. And because of prolonging the process by not persevering through the learning curve, I didn't move forward probably as fast as I could have in the beginning. And so we want to be like little children as we learn this, where we want to soak it all up. Anything we get is good, when we're learning the language. If we pick up the Aleph and we can recognize it and we see writing, we can point it out, we should get excited about that. The next thing is, just because you can get something quickly doesn't mean it's necessarily the best for you or that it brings the same amount of satisfaction. The same thing can be said of a meal. If you were cooking a meal, and it was a microwavable meal or something you can just throw in the oven, while it would still feed you and while it would still probably taste good if it's something that you really like, it doesn't carry with it the same amount of satisfaction. It doesn't carry with it the same amount of satisfaction as if you were to pull out a recipe and prepare that meal from scratch and to gather your ingredients or even cook something that you've grown from your own garden. It's something you can be proud of. And that's how we need to look at this language, where we are taking the seeds of the Father's Word and gathering them from His garden and putting together and nourishing ourselves with this in order to bring forth something that is beautiful, which is an understanding and a deeper relationship with Him. So as we move forward, I kind of want you to think of it like that. And as we pick up the pace, it's going to be kind of rough for some because I'm going to start pushing in some areas, but it's also going to bring a lot of satisfaction as you are able to watch yourself do things that you were never probably able to do before. So every week my goal is to reiterate on how important it is to know Hebrew while slowly opening up your world through the language to different things and different ways of viewing things, or maybe the same way you view things and you didn't know that they were coming from a Hebraic perspective. So this week we'll be actually looking at the whole alphabet. So I know that might sound intimidating for some of you. We're going to go through the whole thing because you've been writing it hopefully and looking at it and probably playing the song. And so you should be familiar enough with it. We're also going to get acquainted with the letters ahead of time. So as they come up in words or other things that you are able to recognize them, but also there might be some of you who say, okay, if I just knew all the letters, and what they look like, I could probably use my lexicon a little bit better, or I could probably understand some of the things in scripture a little bit better if I just knew those individual letters. So what we'll do is we'll just go through and say the letters of the alphabet, and you'll get to experience their, some of them have two different forms or two different sounds they make. And some of them have two different forms, meaning they look different when they're at the end of a word. And so we'll learn what those things are. And we'll also practice that counting. And not only because it's necessary, but also it's cool and it's fun. Once you learn how to count to 10, and Hebrew kind of puts a notch in your belt where it's like, not only do I know the whole alphabet, but I can also count to 10. Also, we're going to start with some vocabulary. In your homework, you've been getting vocabulary in your Learn Biblical Hebrew book, but I also want you putting that vocabulary into practice. And so those things are things that you should commit to memory and then use them. So we're going to go through the sounds and the forms. We're going to go through counting 1 through 10. And we're actually going to cover 2 Hebrew words that are going to use all the letters that we've learned from lesson 1 to now. And so that'll be very interesting. Also, at the end for homework, I'll have a little challenge for those of you who think that you are in a place to rise up to the occasion. Okay, today we're going to start off going through the alphabet. So we'll start at Aleph and work our way down. You can use the chart that I've provided. You can use a chart that maybe you've made for yourself, or if you have the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible, that's available for download on the Her Royal Roots channel. On the Her Royal Roots website, you can just go to that, and on page 33, we'll work our way through that particular alphabet. So we're going to start with Aleph. Aleph is a silent letter, and so it gathers its sounds from the consonants that surround it. And you might not see it that way if you don't have a text that's not using Masoretic vowels. So it will gather its sound from the vowel point that is under the letter, or the consonant that is serving as a vowel next to the letter. So Aleph, or Al, and the picture is the head of an ox. Bet makes the B sound, and the picture is a 10th floor plan. The third letter is a Gimel. Its early name is Gam, and it's a foot. So Gimel, G. The fourth letter is Dalet, and its early sound, or its early name, is Dal, and it makes the D sound. Dalet, D, and Dalet is a tent door. The arms raised are Hey, and its modern name is still a Hey, and that can actually have a couple of sounds. It can add breath to a word, like the breathing, or it can actually function as a strong H sound. And its modern name is Hey, and its early name is Hey. The next one is a mattock or a plow. Its modern name is Zayin, and its early name is Zan, and it makes the Z sound. The next word is Het, or the next letter is Het, and the modern and the early names are the same, and it is a tent wall, and it makes the H sound also. One of the things that we're going to notice with a lot of these letters is that when you look at them in the modern form, they have strong gutturals, or they make strong sounds like Het, Het, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to soften those. In the early Semitic speaking times, those strong gutturals were not necessarily there. They were a lot softer, and so those strong gutturals come from a Germanic influence, so a European influence on the Hebrew language, and so those would have been a lot softer during the Hebrew times. Okay, so the next one is Tet, and it actually has a TH sound in the early Hebrew, so Thet, and the modern sound is a Tet, so a T sound, and it's a clay basket. The next one is Yad, and we say Yod or Yad, which is a hand, an arm and hand, and it makes the Y sound or the I sound in the early Hebrew, and mainly the Y sound in the modern Hebrew. Kaf makes the K sound, and it is a open poem. Let's go back, because I feel like we overlooked a letter, and we did. It was the word or the letter Vav, and the word Vav is the modern way of saying it, but the ancient way of saying the letter Vav was actually W or U. And this is because it's a double U sound. The Vav represents a tent peg or a fastener onto the ground for a tent, so to securely fasten. The next letter is Lam or Lamed, and it says shepherd's staff. It makes the L sound. Next is water, or the picture is water, and the word is Ma in the early Hebrew and Mem in the modern Hebrew, and it's a picture of water making the M sound, like our letter M. Noon makes the N sound or N sound, and it's a picture of a sprouting seed. It was called noon in the early, and it's also called noon in the modern. Sin, or modern day Samik, is a thorn, and it makes the S sound. Ayin is the picture as a picture of an eye, and it was ayin in ancient Hebrew, and it's also ayin in modern Hebrew, and that's actually a silent. Most modern Hebrew speakers say it produces a guttural. We're going to use it as a silent sound. Pei can make the P sound or the F sound formed by a PH combination, and it's called Pei in the early and Pei in the modern, and it is a mouth or an open mouth. Sad or Sadi in modern Hebrew makes the TS sound. So when you say ants, or nuts, that TS sound at the end is the sound of the Sad or the Sadi. Kuf, and it's Kuf in the modern, also makes the Q sound, so the Qu sound, and it's a picture of the sun on the horizon. Resh is the picture of a head of a man, and it makes the R sound or the R sound. It also has a roll to it, so it can be R sound in some words. The Hebrew number 4, arba, it has a kind of roll to it. It's not as pronounced as with other language, but it is their arba. We have shin, which represents 2 front teeth, and it makes the SH sound, sh. In modern Hebrew, you'll hear it sin and shin, and so that'll be brought up at a later time where we look at the dots above the letters to give you the different sounds, and we've actually had those different sounds for a couple of other letters. Tav in modern Hebrew and Tau in early Hebrew, and it's 2 cross sticks, and the sound is the T sound. And the last one, which is one that we'll see in our lexicon and we don't see very often in ancient Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, because it actually represents the letter ayin also, and that's the ga, and it makes the GH sound, and the picture is a rope, and it's also the modern letter ayin, so it's silent. So you might see those definitions intermingled throughout your ancient Hebrew lexicon, where it'll give you what the meaning would be with the ga or the rope. So we worked our way through each of the alphabet letters, and so now we're going to look at counting. So in Hebrew, we count from 1 to whatever number, so we're going to count from 1 to 10. So counting is a Hebrew word lispor, and it's counting. And so we're going to count from 1 to 10. And I think you've seen this in the lesson or in the video that I placed last week. And I would definitely recommend reviewing that, even though I'm going to give you these numbers again to kind of refresh. So one interesting thing that I picked up about the Hebrew counting system is that when it's first taught, it's taught in the feminine. And obviously there's a form of counting masculine objects and feminine objects, but when it's first taught, it's taught in the feminine. And I believe this is because one of the first teachers that many children have are their mothers. And so if I was teaching my children to count, I would teach them to count from a feminine perspective, if I'm just going through the numbers. So number 1 is achat. Number 2, shatayim. Number 3, shalosh. 4, arba. 5, chamesh. 6, Sheish, 7, Sheva, 8, Shmone, 9, Tesha, 10, Eser. And you can go over those over and over again by yourself or with your children in order to get yourself a little more familiar with them. Share them with other family members, share them with your husband, make songs out of them. If you're just by yourself, make songs out of them also. We all do it. And just get yourself familiar because we'll be using those. Okay, so next we're going to look at 2 Hebrew words. And so we're actually going to be using this book. And if you have the physical book, then I'll give you the page number. If you have the digital book, the page number should coincide pretty closely. And so how you look up things in here, I explained this in another video, is in alphabetical order, but it's in Hebrew alphabetical order. So it's not like, oh, M, N, O. No, it doesn't necessarily work like that. So we're going to open up the book, and we're going to go to the 2-letter roots. So there's 2-letter roots and 3-letter roots, or there's parent roots and child roots to be more consistent with how the book works. And so the parent roots are the roots that are the main roots that words are made of. And then there are sometimes other words added to expand that word, and that can also be roots for other words. So right now we're going to look in the parent roots, which is closer to the front of the book, and we're going to start with the letter Aleph. And Aleph is going to be the first thing that pops up, and then we're going to work our way and find the letter Mem. So if you want to do it like how we do our how you work through letters in our modern alphabet, then you would go A, B, C, D, E, F, G to find it. So if you start with Aleph, and that's the first letter, then you would work your way through, say, okay, I have Aleph, now let me find Aleph Mem. So you would go Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and so forth, and work your way through in that order until you found the Aleph with the Mem next to it. And if you're not really familiar with the Hebrew letters, what's good about this lexicon is that you should be familiar with pictures. So if you know the Aleph is an ox head and the Mem looks like water, then when you see the ox head in the water and you look to the right of that, you'll see an Aleph and a Mem. In Hebrew, the Aleph and the Mem combine to form the word for mother. And here in front of you, because you've looked it up, you can actually read through that and see how that works, how a mother is compared to glue. And if you want to even go a little bit further, and I might add a video of this, glue is formed by a prolonged boiling of animal tissue through hydrolysis. And you take the collagen from the skins and the bones and the tendons, and they're placed in water and they're boiled down until they form a sticky substance like glue. Well, the Hebrews saw the mother as glue because she's the thing that bound or held the family together, whether it was with her arms or whether it was with her work, the work she put forth with her body in order to grow the child, or with her breasts in order to feed the child, or with her work, actual physical work, in order to provide something for the family. The next word we're going to look at is the word for prophet. So by now we've learned the Nun, the Bet, the Yod, and the Aleph through our Hebrew homework. And so we're going to look at the word prophet because it's a part of the words we learned in order to see what actually a prophet is. So you're going to assist me in the same way. So we're at Aleph right now, looking at M or Am, and we're going to actually go to Nun. So if you need your Hebrew chart, you're going to work through and go from Aleph to Nun and your ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible. When you get to Nun, the next thing you're going to look for is the Nun and the Bet. So Nun and the Bet. So Bet is actually the second Hebrew letter of the alphabet, so it'll be closer to the beginning of the section on Nun. And so once you find the Nun and the Bet, what's interesting here is that you're going to only look for the parent root. And within these definitions of the parent root, you're actually going to find your extended root, because Nab or Nun Bet is your parent root for this word that gives you your first picture. And then you'll add in your Yod and the Aleph, or just the Aleph, because sometimes these other letters serve as either vowel points or they kind of change the definition slightly, but it's still all the same definition. So in the future, we will be looking at how to pull out the roots of the words. Right now, we're going to focus on how to look them up just this way for now. because I want you to be more familiar with your Aleph bet, because once we start pulling out the roots of the words, you'll be reading by then. And that's why we're kind of picking up the pace, because I know that's the point where everybody wants to get, where I can look at the words and kind of be able to pick out the meanings. And so this is a beginning stage, and it's probably going to be a little bit challenging without actually knowing how to pull out the roots of the words. But what's really good about modern technology is that most of the time when you look up a word in the Strongs, especially if you're looking it up online through a resource like Bible Hub, what you can always do is go to the root. It'll actually say word origin if you're looking at it, and click that. And it'll give you a root that doesn't have all the other Hebrew letters in it. So it'll make it a lot easier to look it up as we're moving toward being able to what they call conjugate your verbs in the Hebrew language. Okay, so on page 179 of your Ancient Hebrew Lexicon, you'll see the word nun, bet, or nab, and it gives you the definition of this word. And so a prophet, then, as you can see, comes from the word to flourish or fruit. And the prophecy is a picture of the seed inside, or the seed inside of the house. And so what happens with the seed inside of the house is that it is the prophet who brings forth the inner fruit from out of, obviously, Yah's word. And so part of the homework is going to be looking through these and kind of seeing how the different words like prophecy and prophet and the word hollow all work together to get the same exact meaning. Okay, so this week I'm going to give you some vocabulary words. You know the difference between the letters and how they look, and so you'll have some of that in your homework. You'll also look at the final forms of the letters. So you'll be working your way through, and I'll actually have you circle the final forms on a particular sheet so that you know the difference between, let's say, a pay, a fay, and a peso-feet. Right now that might sound like gibberish, but if you have your chart in front of you, you can see how those things work. You don't have to know exactly how they function. I just want you to be familiar that some letters have 3 different forms for the letters. We're going to actually be looking at placing the sounds next to the letters. So I'll give you a blank chart. It'll have the Aleph and the bet, and it'll work all the way to the Aleph bet. And your job will be to look at the Aleph and say, okay, this is a silent letter. Look at the bet and put down the sound. Look at the Dalet and so forth, and you're going to go all the way through. Okay? And then I'm going to give you some word lookups. So I'll put the word on the top of the page, and then I'll give it to you in Hebrew, and you're going to go through your lexicon and actually find and look up that word, and then write down the definition. And then look at the word pictures on your Hebrew chart and see how the definition actually is derived from those word pictures and those combinations. Today's lesson was relatively short, but I wanted to give you some more hands-on work to do with the Hebrew language. Next week, we'll jump right back in and picking up a few more letters at a time. And so next week, we'll have enough letters to actually put together some more words, and then we'll work on how those word combinations work in order to give us more definitions. Shalom, shalom.
Royalty. Royalty. Power to the chosen people.